What if your childhood home had one more room than you remembered? Ethan Carver hadn't stepped foot inside his childhood home in almost 20 years. When his parents passed within months of each other, he inherited the old place in Brooksville, a quiet New England town that felt frozen in the late 1980s. The house stood on a sloping street with its peeling white paint, sagging porch swing, and shutters that rattled even when the air was still. From the outside, nothing seemed different. But inside, the house greeted him like a stranger. Dust coated the wooden banister of the staircase. Faded floral wallpaper clung to the walls, the same his mother insisted gave the place warmth, though it had always made Ethan feel suffocated. He felt a pang of nostalgia, but also dread. Places like this didn't stay empty for long. Memories seeped into the floorboards, waiting. He walked slowly through each room. The kitchen still smelled faintly of mildew and old coffee. The dining room table sat in the same position as always, though the chairs were askew, as if people had left in a hurry. He moved into the living room, staring at the fireplace where he used to hang his Christmas stockings. It all felt exactly the same, and yet, not. It wasn't until he climbed the stairs that he noticed something different. At the top of the hallway, past his old bedroom and his sister's, was a door. A door that had never been there before. He froze, staring at it. The hallway should have ended in a dead wall, where his mother once hung a framed photograph of the family at the beach. But now there was a narrow wooden door, its brass knob dulled with age, as if it had always been there. Ethan's skin prickled. His mind immediately tried to explain it away, faulty memory, a trick of childhood perception. Maybe he'd just forgotten. Maybe a wall had been converted into a storage space years ago. But he knew. He knew this door had never existed. He reached for the knob, but it wouldn't turn. Locked. Something cold crawled down his spine. He backed away, shut himself in his old room, and tried to laugh at his nerves. Old houses shift. Doors appear. Nothing weird about that, he muttered, though he didn't believe it. That night, he couldn't sleep. The house creaked and settled like it always had, but every sound felt amplified. Somewhere in the dark, he thought he heard tapping. Soft, rhythmic. Almost like fingernails on wood. He told himself it was branches outside. But when he finally got up to check, there were no trees near the hallway wall. Only the locked door. The next morning, Ethan's curiosity got the better of him. He went into town and bought a small toolkit. When he returned, the house felt colder, though the sun was spilling across the floorboards. He knelt by the door, working at the knob until finally, click. The door creaked open. A breath of stale air rushed past him, like a sigh escaping after decades. Inside was a narrow staircase spiraling downward. But that didn't make sense. He was upstairs. The door should have led into an attic crawlspace or a closet. Instead, a staircase descended into darkness, steep and impossibly deep, as if it tunneled far below the foundations of the house. Ethan's hand trembled on the frame. He thought about leaving it alone. Locking the door again, forgetting he ever saw it. But something inside him whispered that this was important, too important to ignore. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped through. The air grew colder with every step. The wooden stairs groaned under his weight. The deeper he went, the more he smelled something strange, a mix of lavender, talcum powder, and something sour beneath it, like spoiled milk. Finally, the staircase ended at another door. This one was painted white, with delicate little carvings of stars and moons etched across its surface. Ethan's chest tightened. It looked like a nursery door. His hand shook as he opened it. The room beyond was perfectly preserved, as if sealed in time. A rocking chair sat in the corner, a small crib against the wall, and shelves stacked with children's books and stuffed animals. Everything was clean. Untouched. A mobile of tiny wooden airplanes hung above the crib, spinning slightly, though no air stirred. Ethan's breath caught when his flashlight beam landed on the wall. Framed photographs. Dozens of them. Each one showed the same baby boy. His baby pictures. But the people holding him weren't his parents. They were strangers. A man and a woman, smiling, cradling him in their arms as if he were their child. A woman with dark hair he had never seen before. A man with sharp, angular features. Ethan's heart pounded as he stumbled closer. His childhood face stared back at him in photo after photo, but his parents, the ones who had raised him, were nowhere to be seen. In the silence, the rocking chair creaked once. Back and forth. Slowly. Ethan spun toward it. The chair moved on its own, as though someone had just gotten up. And faintly, almost imperceptibly, a lullaby began to play. Not from the room. From behind him. The melody was faint at first, just a soft hum that seemed to drift from the shadows behind him. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. He knew that tune. Somehow, impossibly, he knew it. It was the same lullaby his mother used to hum when he was a child, the same one that lulled him to sleep on nights when thunder rattled the windows. But the sound didn't come from memory. It was real, alive, and floating through the cold air of the hidden nursery. Slowly, as if afraid to disturb something lurking nearby, he turned. The door he had entered from now stood slightly ajar. The humming was leaking from the gap, growing louder, clearer, more deliberate. Whoever, or whatever, was making that sound wanted him to hear it. His skin prickled as he tightened his grip on the flashlight, the beam shaking with the tremor in his hand. For a long moment, Ethan considered retreating. He could lock the door again, pretend none of this existed, and walk away from Brooksville forever. But the photographs on the wall, his photographs, kept pulling him back. They were undeniable proof that something about his life was not what it seemed. He couldn't leave, not without answers. He pushed the nursery door fully open and stepped back into the stairwell. The lullaby seemed to slide down the walls like water, echoing faintly. It led him further down, farther than the hidden staircase should have gone. With each step, the air grew colder, and the smell of lavender thickened, cloying, almost nauseating now. The stairs ended at a landing where the air felt heavy, oppressive, as if it were pressing against his chest. Another door stood ahead, this one plain and wooden, its frame warped with age. The lullaby came from the other side. Ethan swallowed hard, heart hammering, and placed his ear against it. The voice was unmistakably female, soft, tender, carrying a note of sadness beneath the sweetness. It was the kind of lullaby a mother sings when she's trying not to cry. Ethan's hand trembled on the knob. He forced himself to turn it. The door opened with a long, slow creak, revealing another room that shouldn't exist beneath the foundations of his childhood home. This one wasn't a nursery, it looked more like a parlor, but wrong, as though it had been lifted from another time. Heavy curtains of crimson velvet framed a window that opened onto nothing but blackness. The wallpaper was a deep shade of green, peeling in places, revealing wood beneath. In the center of the room sat an old phonograph, its horn spinning slowly. The lullaby crackled from it, though there was no record on the turntable. The moment Ethan stepped inside, the door behind him slammed shut with a force that made the walls rattle. He spun, rushing back, but the knob wouldn't turn. He was trapped. The lullaby stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. Then he noticed something on the table beside the phonograph, a picture frame. He moved closer, lifting it into the beam of his flashlight. The photograph showed the same strangers from the nursery, the dark-haired woman and the angular-faced man, standing together, arms around each other. But this time, there was no baby in their arms. Instead, there was an empty crib behind them, covered with a white sheet. The woman's eyes seemed to glisten even in the still image, her smile stretched too wide, brittle, as though barely holding together. And beneath the frame, scratched into the wood of the table, were 4 words. We'll bring him back. Ethan staggered backward, the frame slipping from his fingers and clattering to the floor. His mind spun with questions he couldn't answer. Who were these people? Why did they have photographs of him as a baby? And what did those words mean, bring him back? Before he could think, he heard the sound of movement. A soft dragging noise, like feet shuffling across carpet. His flashlight swung toward the corner of the room. The velvet curtains shifted, though there was no wind. The fabric trembled, as if someone was standing behind them. Ethan's throat tightened, his body urging him to run even though he had nowhere to go. He forced his voice out, hoarse and trembling. Who's there? The curtains stilled. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from behind the fabric, a whisper. Ethan. The voice was neither male nor female, it was layered, as though several voices spoke at once. Cold sweat dripped down his back. The flashlight flickered. He wanted to deny it, but deep down, he knew, whoever was behind that curtain knew him. He took one step forward, his hand shaking violently, the flashlight trembling. The whisper came again, louder this time, almost eager. Come home, Ethan. The curtain bulged outward, as if something pressed against it from the other side. The outline of a hand appeared through the fabric, long, thin fingers straining forward. Then another hand. The curtain hooks clattered as the fabric began to peel away, inch by inch. Ethan stumbled back, his heel catching on the phonograph table. The frame he dropped cracked beneath his shoe. Panic surged through him, and he bolted toward the door, slamming his fists against the wood, screaming for it to open. Behind him, the curtains ripped open. And in a brief flash before his light sputtered and died, Ethan saw them, two figures stepping forward, their faces pale and stretched in unnatural smiles, their eyes black and bottomless. The same man and woman from the photographs. Only now, they were older. Much older. And they were looking directly at him. Ethan pressed his back against the locked door, every nerve screaming to get out. His flashlight sputtered weakly, casting trembling cones of light across the parlor, and in that fragile glow, the two figures stepped closer. The woman's hair, once dark in the photographs, now hung in long gray strands, uneven as though cut with dull scissors. Her face was thin, sunken around the eyes, but when she smiled, her lips stretched with unsettling familiarity, as if she had smiled at him this way before, long ago, in a place he could not remember. The man beside her was tall, his angular jaw now sharper, his frame skeletal beneath his clothes. His hands twitched slightly as though struggling to remain still, the tendons standing out like wires beneath parchment skin. Ethan, the woman whispered again, and though her voice cracked with age, it carried warmth. A mother's warmth. Her eyes glistened, brimming with tears that never quite fell. You came back. Ethan shook his head, pressing harder against the door as if he could melt into it. Who the hell are you? His voice cracked, the demand hollow in the stale air. Why are you in my parents' house? The man tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Not their house, he said softly. His voice was low, rasping, yet somehow familiar. Never theirs. It was always ours. The woman stepped forward, reaching a trembling hand toward him. We waited for you, Ethan. We knew you'd come back to us. You were taken from us, but now you've found your way home. The words sliced through him. Taken? Home? His mind raced, rejecting what she implied. His parents, their faces, their voices, their love, flashed in his mind. They had raised him. They had kissed his scraped knees, cheered at his school plays, wept at his graduation. The thought that they weren't truly his parents was absurd. Impossible. And yet, those photographs upstairs. No, Ethan whispered, shaking his head violently. You're lying. My parents raised me. I don't know who the hell you are, but you're not my family. For the first time, the woman's smile faltered. Pain washed across her features, raw and unhidden, as though his words had pierced straight into her chest. The man, however, didn't flinch. His blackened eyes studied Ethan with clinical precision, like a scientist watching an experiment unfold. "You don't remember," the man said simply. "That's why you resist. But you will. You cannot hide from blood." Ethan's hands fumbled at the doorknob again, yanking, rattling, slamming his shoulder against the wood. The door wouldn't budge. He felt the walls around him, felt the oppressive air pressing down as if the house itself refused to let him escape. Behind him, the woman moved closer still, her fingers brushing the edge of his sleeve. "We sang to you every night," she whispered. "Our lullaby. Do you remember, Ethan? That song they stole from us? We sang until our voices broke. We sang through the walls, waiting for you to hear us again. The lullaby." Ethan's stomach twisted violently. He had always thought the song belonged to his mother, that it was hers alone. But the way this woman spoke, it was as though the tune had belonged to her first. His heart pounded so hard he thought his ribs might crack. The man's skeletal hand twitched once more before curling into a fist. "He doesn't belong here," he said to the woman, his gaze never leaving Ethan. "He doesn't belong above. He must remember." Ethan's panic surged into defiance. "I'm not your son," he shouted. His voice shook, but it filled the room, bouncing off the velvet curtains and peeling wallpaper. "Stay away from me." The woman recoiled as though struck, but her eyes softened again almost immediately. "Not yet," she said quietly. "But soon." The man lifted one long finger and pointed toward the phonograph. Without anyone touching it, the horn began to spin again. A crackle of static filled the silence, followed by the lullaby, soft, warped, echoing as though recorded years ago. The sound burrowed into Ethan's mind, prying open memories he didn't want. He clenched his eyes shut, fighting it, but flashes slipped through, a crib he didn't recognize, a mobile of tiny airplanes spinning above him, a woman's voice, not his mother's, humming him to sleep. His breath hitched. He staggered, clutching the doorframe as if the world was tilting. The woman's hand pressed against his cheek now, cold but tender. "There," she whispered. "You do remember." Ethan jerked away violently, smacking her hand aside. The flashlight tumbled from his grip, clattering to the floor. Its beam spun wildly across the room, illuminating the strangers' faces in grotesque fragments. For the briefest second, their smiles widened unnaturally, stretching too far, their eyes sinking deeper, until they looked less like people and more like masks pulled tight over something else. The beam sputtered, flickered, then went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Ethan's ragged breathing filled the silence, each gasp louder in the void. Then, soft footsteps moved toward him, slow, deliberate, closing the space inch by inch. He fumbled blindly at the door, nails clawing the wood, desperation clawing at his chest. And then, just when he thought the strangers would touch him, something clicked. The door swung open behind him, spilling cold air into the parlor. Without thinking, Ethan bolted through it, stumbling up the hidden staircase, taking the steps two at a time. His lungs burned, his vision swam, but he didn't stop. The lullaby followed him up the stairs, chasing him, growing louder, until it wasn't coming from below anymore, it was coming from inside his head. He burst through the first nursery door, slamming it shut behind him. For a long moment he stood there in the hallway, doubled over, gasping, his body shaking so hard he thought his knees might give out. The air upstairs felt different, warmer, real, but the door behind him throbbed with a faint sound. A heartbeat. Slow, steady. Coming from within the wood itself. Ethan stumbled backward, staring at the door, his mind unraveling. And then he saw something that nearly stopped his own heart. The photographs from the hidden nursery were now hanging in the upstairs hallway. Every picture. Every frame. And in the newest one, right at the center, was an image of him. Not as a baby. Not as a child. As he stood now, grown, terrified, staring straight into the camera, the door looming just behind him. Ethan's breath came in sharp, shallow bursts as he staggered backward from the wall. His eyes darted across the row of frames, each one hanging neatly, evenly spaced, as though they had always been there. Yet he knew they hadn't. Just minutes ago, the hallway had been bare except for dust and peeling wallpaper. Now it looked like a gallery curated with surgical precision, his entire stolen childhood displayed for him to confront. His knees trembled as he stepped closer. The photographs no longer depicted just his infancy. They had grown. The images followed him from crib to toddlerhood, to the first time he sat at a table with birthday candles glowing before him. Only the parents in the pictures were always the same, the pale, angular man and the dark-haired woman with the brittle smile. They cradled him, kissed his cheek, held his tiny hands as though he were their flesh and blood. Ethan's chest constricted. His mind rebelled. No. My parents raised me. Mom had a laugh that filled the kitchen. Dad fixed the bike I wrecked when I was 9. They were real. They were mine. But there, framed in glass and wood, was another truth, a truth that felt impossibly old, impossibly patient, waiting for him to look it in the eye. At the very center of the arrangement hung the newest photo. He could not look away. His own face stared back at him, pale in the flashlight's dying glow, wide-eyed, every muscle tense. The picture was impossibly recent, impossibly accurate. It was him as he stood now, wearing the same shirt, the same expression of raw terror. Only in the photograph, his figure wasn't alone. Behind him, looming in the shadows, stood the two strangers. Their hands rested on his shoulders like parents posing proudly with their son. A strangled cry broke from Ethan's throat. He ripped the frame from the wall, shattering the glass on the hardwood floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silence of the hallway. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Then, the other photographs began to change. He watched in horror as the faces of his real parents, the mother who had tucked him in, the father who had carried him on his shoulders, bled out of the frames, dissolving into shadow. The images warped and stretched until only the strangers remained in every photo, their dark eyes staring out, endless and unblinking. Even the oldest family portraits, the beach trips, the Christmas mornings, every smile, every laugh, erased and replaced. Ethan stumbled back, pressing his fists to his skull as though he could squeeze out the images, but the house itself seemed to conspire against him. The hallway lights flickered once, twice, then buzzed to life, bathing the walls in a jaundiced glow. He hadn't turned them on. He hadn't touched a switch. The air thickened, heavy with the lavender sour scent that had followed him from below. He knew, without proof, without reason, that the strangers were near again. The house itself carried their presence like breath in its lungs. Ethan turned sharply, ready to run, but the hallway stretched impossibly long. It was no longer the familiar corridor of his childhood but a warped tunnel, the doors to the other bedrooms gone, the walls pulsing faintly as though alive. His legs felt like lead as he forced himself forward. Each step echoed unnaturally, overlapping, as if footsteps were following close behind. He reached what should have been the staircase, but instead of opening onto the banister and the first floor, another door awaited him. Tall. Narrow. Its wood was painted a faded white, but faintly beneath the paint he could see carvings, stars and moons, just like the nursery door below. No, Ethan whispered, his throat raw. Not again. Not. The doorknob rattled before he touched it. Something on the other side wanted out. Ethan spun around, desperate to retreat, but the hallway behind him was gone. Only walls pressed close, covered in wallpaper that seemed to breathe in and out, each exhale carrying the sickly perfume of lavender. He was trapped. The rattling stopped. A silence so deep it made his ears ring swallowed the air. Then, a soft sound, fingernails tapping gently on wood. The same rhythm he had heard that first night. Tap. 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 And then, his name. Whispered, tender, almost pleading. "Ethan, let us in." His heart thundered, sweat dripping down his spine. He backed against the wall, shaking his head violently. "You're not real. You're not mine. You can't be." The door creaked as though something leaned against it from the other side. The tapping grew more urgent, turning to scratching. Claws dragging down the wood, desperate to break through. Ethan slammed his fists against the wall, screaming, but the sound was swallowed whole by the house. The scratching built to a frenzy, splinters flaking from the frame, until at last the door burst open. But there was nothing. Only darkness. A black void yawning where the room should have been. The lavender stench poured from it in suffocating waves. Ethan stumbled backward, covering his mouth and nose, eyes watering. He could feel it, the void wasn't empty. Something waited inside, watching him with hunger, waiting for him to take a step closer. For one terrible moment, Ethan felt an impossible pull, a tug deep in his chest like a hook catching on his ribs, dragging him forward. He braced against the wall, digging his nails into the wallpaper as the blackness seemed to reach for him. His vision swam, his breath came in ragged gasps. And then, through the void, he heard it again. The lullaby. This time, though, it wasn't coming from the strangers. It was his mother's voice. His real mother's. Clear, gentle, the way she used to sing when thunder shook the windows. The melody wrapped around him like a warm blanket, fragile but achingly familiar. His tears spilled hot down his cheeks. "Mom," the word cracked from his throat like a prayer. For a moment, the pull of the void lessened. He could almost feel her presence, the memory of her hands smoothing his hair, her voice whispering that everything would be okay. Then the lullaby faltered. Warped. Another voice joined hers, layering over the song, twisting it, until it was no longer his mother's voice at all but theirs, the stranger's. The sound grew louder, doubling, tripling, surrounding him from all directions. "Come home, Ethan," they sang in unison. "Come home." The pull of the void returned, stronger this time, yanking at him with relentless force. His fingers tore at the wallpaper as chunks of plaster crumbled in his hands. His feet slid across the floorboards, inching closer to the blackness. And in that last instant, before the darkness swallowed him whole, Ethan saw something move inside the void. A crib. A small, white crib. And inside it, a baby. A baby with his face. Ethan's body jerked violently as he tore himself away from the void, collapsing onto the warped hallway floor. His chest heaved, every breath like fire in his lungs. The image of the crib still burned behind his eyes, the baby with his face staring up at him, its tiny fists clenched, its mouth opening in a soundless cry. He pressed his palms against his temples, trying to block it out, but the harder he tried, the clearer it became. The house had gone silent again. The scratching, the lullaby, even the pulsing breath of the wallpaper had stopped, leaving only his ragged gasps echoing in the stillness. Slowly, Ethan pushed himself to his feet. His legs wobbled beneath him, and when he glanced back toward the doorway, the black void was gone. The door had sealed itself shut again, smooth and unbroken, as if it had never opened. But the smell lingered. That suffocating lavender sourness clung to his clothes, burrowed into his skin. Ethan staggered down the hall, hoping to reach the staircase, but when he turned the corner, his breath caught in his throat. The photographs were back. Dozens of them, lining the walls, glimmering faintly in the yellow light. Only now they were different again. They weren't of his childhood anymore. They were of his life. He saw himself as a teenager, standing in front of his high school, his arm around friends he barely spoke to anymore. He saw himself on the day of his college graduation, cap crooked, gown wrinkled. He saw himself at his first job, sitting behind a desk, eyes red with exhaustion. Every moment he thought had been his and his alone was here, framed, recorded, catalogued. But in every single photo, the strangers were there. Sometimes in the background, sometimes at the edges of crowds, sometimes only reflected in a window or a mirror. Watching. Smiling. Always smiling. Ethan's stomach churned. He reached out to touch one of the frames, his hand trembling, and recoiled as the glass was warm beneath his fingers, warm like living skin. "This isn't real," he whispered. His voice cracked in the stale air. "This can't be real." But even as he said it, a voice inside him whispered that it was. That the strangers had always been there, waiting patiently for him to notice. He stumbled toward his old bedroom, slammed the door shut, and pressed his back against it. The room was exactly as he remembered, his childhood bed, the faded posters on the wall, the desk where he'd written homework. For a brief moment, he felt relief. This room felt untouched, unchanged, as though it had been preserved in amber. But then he noticed the photographs. Dozens of them, scattered across his bedspread, his desk, even tacked to the walls. Not in frames this time, but raw prints, curling at the edges, smelling faintly of chemicals. He picked one up with shaking hands. It was a picture of his 7th birthday party. He remembered it well, balloons tied to the porch, his mother carrying out a cake shaped like a dinosaur. But in the photo, it wasn't his mother holding the cake. It was her, the dark-haired woman with the brittle smile. He dropped the photo and grabbed another. His first day of kindergarten. His father had taken him by the hand and walked him through the doors. But here, in this photo, it was the angular man, his hollow eyes gleaming with pride. "No," Ethan choked. "No, that's not right. That's not." He grabbed more, flipping through them frantically, each one stabbing holes into his memory. Every cherished moment he recalled was different here. Altered. Twisted. The parents he had loved were erased, overwritten, replaced by these strangers who claimed him. His mind whirled. Which version was true? Had he invented his parents? Fabricated them out of need? Or were these photos nothing more than manipulations, lies crafted to break him? He couldn't tell anymore. He clutched his head, rocking slightly, trying to anchor himself. He remembered his mother's voice, the softness in her lullaby. He remembered his father's laugh when they watched baseball together on the couch. Those were real. They had to be real. But hadn't the lullaby already betrayed him? Hadn't the strangers sung it too? A sob tore from his chest. His memories were unraveling, threads slipping through his fingers no matter how tightly he tried to hold them. Then, he noticed something else. Among the scattered photos was one that didn't match the others. It wasn't of him as a child or a teenager or an adult. It wasn't of his life at all. It was a photograph of the nursery. The same one he had seen below the house, pristine and timeless. Only here, the room wasn't empty. The crib was occupied. And the baby lying there wasn't him. It was someone else entirely. A baby with dark hair and eyes so deep they seemed bottomless. Ethan's skin crawled as he stared at the picture, dread pooling in his stomach. This child, whoever they were, looked wrong. Their gaze felt too knowing, too sharp, like they understood something an infant never could. And beneath the photo, scrawled in jagged handwriting, were words that made Ethan's blood run cold. The one who was left behind. His fingers went numb. The photo slipped from his hand and drifted to the floor. The room was suddenly too quiet. No creaks, no hums, no whispers, just silence pressing down on him like a weight. Then, softly, the bed beneath the scattered photographs dipped, as though someone invisible had sat down beside him. Ethan froze, his breath catching. He didn't dare move, didn't dare look. The air next to him shifted, warmer now, carrying the faintest smell of lavender. And then, right by his ear, a whisper. "Do you finally see, Ethan? You were never theirs." Ethan couldn't move. His muscles locked as though the whisper itself had turned his blood to stone. The unseen weight on the bed pressed harder, sinking the mattress beneath him, the lavender scent growing thick enough to choke. He wanted to scream, to leap from the room, to tear his way back into daylight, but his throat betrayed him. When he finally managed to whip his head around, the bed was empty. No imprint, no figure, nothing but the scattered photographs trembling slightly as if a breeze had passed over them. But the window was closed. There was no breeze. Ethan stumbled to his feet, his vision tunneling. The walls of his old bedroom seemed to lean inward, the corners breathing like living things. His gaze darted back to the floor where the photograph of the other baby lay. The one who was left behind. That phrase gnawed at him. Who was the child in the crib? Another sibling? A twin? Or something worse, someone who was supposed to take his place? His mind clawed through fragments of memory, searching desperately. He thought of his earliest years, the vague, blurry recollections of warm arms lifting him, of lullabies in the dark. But they were slippery, dissolving when he tried to grasp them. Were they even his memories, or had they been given to him, stitched into his mind like false seams in a patchwork quilt? The whisper returned, this time distant, almost playful, as if drifting through the walls. "You took his life, Ethan. You lived what was never meant for you." His skin prickled. "That's not true," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "I had parents. I had a family. They were real." The whisper laughed. Not cruelly, but with a strange, maternal warmth that made his stomach turn. He bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind him, and sprinted down the hall. The house groaned under his feet, each step echoing far too loud. He needed to get out, to breathe air that wasn't tainted by dust and rot and lavender. He barreled toward the front door, but when he threw it open, his heart ceased. The world outside was wrong. The porch was there, the yard, the cracked driveway, but the street was gone. In its place stretched an endless field of black trees, their skeletal branches clawing upward against a colorless sky. No cars, no houses, no sign of the neighborhood that should have been there. Only the forest. The air that rushed and carried no breeze, no sound of birds, no insects. Just silence. Ethan slammed the door shut and staggered back, clutching his chest. His pulse roared in his ears. "This isn't happening," he whispered. "It's not real." But a small, cold part of him whispered back, "What if it is?" The photographs in the hall began to shiver, their frames rattling as though something pounded faintly behind the walls. One by one, they tumbled to the ground, the glass cracking, splintering. Ethan winced as he stepped back, his heel crunching over a shard. The last frame to fall was different. Bigger than the rest. It crashed face down on the floorboards, and against his better judgment, Ethan bent to lift it. It was heavy, far too heavy for a picture. When he turned it over, he staggered back. It wasn't a photo. It was a mirror. And in its cracked surface, Ethan saw himself, only it wasn't him. The reflection wore his face, but the eyes were darker, older, carrying the same bottomless weight as the infant in the crib. The reflection didn't move with him. It stood still, watching, studying, smiling faintly. Then its lips parted, and it spoke. "You were supposed to be me." Ethan dropped the mirror, and it shattered into a spray of glass across the hall. His knees buckled, and he leaned against the wall, bile rising in his throat. His chest heaved as he tried to steady himself. The words echoed in his skull like a church bell. "You were supposed to be me." That was when the memories started to bleed. Not his memories, someone else's. They crashed into him in waves, a nursery filled with warmth, lullabies sung not in his mother's voice but in hers, the woman with the brittle smile. A man lifting him, cradling him close, whispering promises. A life he never lived but felt as if he should have. And then, the moment of loss. Arms ripping him away. The stranger's voices screaming. Darkness swallowing everything. Ethan fell to the floor, clutching his head. His own memories collided violently with the intruding ones, each tearing at the seams of his mind. His parents' laughter clashed against the stranger's whispers. His birthday cake blurred into a crib that wasn't his. He didn't know which was truth and which was lie. But one thing grew clear among the chaos. He had been taken. Not born into his family, but stolen. Plucked from one life and placed into another. And whoever had been left behind, whoever he was, still lingered, watching through photographs, mirrors, and walls. The lavender air thickened until Ethan gagged. His vision spotted, the edges of the world warping. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard the lullaby again, slow, patient, carrying up from the belly of the house. This time, though, it wasn't sung for him. It was sung for the one who was left behind. The song rose, growing louder, shaking the floorboards, rattling the doors until they banged against their frames. And then, beneath the song, came a low thud. From the basement. Then another. And another. Each one heavier than the last, as if something large, something that had been asleep for a very long time, was now moving. Rising. Coming up. Ethan's heart jackhammered. His instincts screamed to run, but where could he go? The forest outside? The house itself? There was nowhere safe. Nowhere left to hide. Another thud rattled the walls. Dust rained from the ceiling. The basement door at the end of the hall shuddered, its knob twitching as if under a heavy hand. Ethan's voice broke into a whisper. "Oh God, what did they leave behind down there?" The basement door rattled again, harder this time, as though something massive pressed from the other side. The knob twisted left, then right, grinding against the old lock that had no business still holding after all these years. The lullaby wove through the pounding, notes bending unnaturally, like a music box with its gears rusted and warped. Ethan's back pressed to the wall. His lungs felt too tight, his legs too weak, but his body surged forward on raw instinct. He darted toward the front door again, gripped the handle, and yanked. It didn't move. He pulled harder, but the wood groaned as though fused to the frame. It was as though the house itself had decided, he wasn't leaving. Thud. Thud. The basement door banged louder. Dust fell in clouds from the ceiling, covering his hair, clinging to his skin. He grabbed a shard of broken mirror from the floor, clutching it like a knife, though the edge bit into his palm. He told himself it was better than nothing. He told himself that glass could stop whatever nightmare wanted to claw its way up. But deep down, he knew nothing could. The knob stopped rattling. Silence draped itself over the hall like a burial shroud. Ethan's chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, the silence worse than the noise. Every muscle in him screamed to run, but he stood frozen, his eyes locked on the basement door, waiting for it to twitch again. Then, softly, impossibly, he heard a child's giggle. It floated up from the floorboards, innocent, high-pitched, but wrong. It didn't belong in a house like this. It didn't belong in a place where the world outside had been replaced by endless forest. The giggle turned into a series of muffled whispers, children's voices, overlapping, circling him though no one was there. Ethan. Ethan. His grip tightened on the glass shard. "Shut up," he hissed, his own voice cracking. The whispers didn't shut up. They grew clearer, rising from the basement like smoke. "It should have been me. You took it all. He's still waiting." The basement door exploded inward with a sound like wood splitting under an axe. Ethan screamed and stumbled back as the pieces of the frame scattered across the hall. From the darkness beyond, a smell rushed out, thick, sour, and metallic, like rust and rot mixed together. And then he saw it. At first, only hands. Small, pale hands, gripping the frame from inside, nails too long, scraping splinters as they pulled. Then a face, no, not a face. A parody of one. It looked like him, like Ethan, but younger. A boy of maybe 7 or 8, with skin too waxy, eyes too wide, and a smile that cut ear to ear. "You left me here," the boy said. His voice was Ethan's voice, pitched higher, uncanny and wrong. "You lived my life. You took my family. You wore my name." Ethan staggered, shaking his head violently. No, that's not true, I didn't." The boy crawled fully into the hall, dragging himself on spindly limbs. His movements were jerky, marionette-like, but fast. His clothes were old, faded, baby blue pajamas with embroidered stars, stained with something dark. "They chose you," the boy hissed, eyes flashing black in the dim light. "And they locked me away. But now you're here. Now we can trade." The glass shard in Ethan's hand trembled. He raised it, warning the thing to stay back, though his arm felt like it was made of lead. The boy cocked his head, grin widening. "You think that hurts me? You think that saves you?" His voice deepened, layered, not a child's anymore but something far older. "You are the mistake, Ethan. I am the one left behind. The true son." The walls groaned as if agreeing with him. The family photos scattered across the floor began to curl and blacken at the edges, faces warping, eyes gouging themselves out. The nursery door down the hall creaked open slowly, the lavender stench thickening until Ethan gagged. The boy darted forward. Ethan slashed with the shard, catching its cheek. Black fluid splattered, hissing as it hit the floorboards. The boy shrieked, not in pain, but in something like delight. "Good. Fight me. Give it back to me." The house shook with the force of his words. Upstairs, doors slammed one by one. Somewhere, a clock ticked, though it hadn't worked in decades. Ethan stumbled back into the living room, glass still clutched tight. His eyes darted to the boarded-up window, to the heavy furniture, to anything that could be a weapon. But every escape looked like a dead end. The boy advanced, dragging his 2 long fingers across the walls, leaving smears of black ichor. The whispers from the walls grew louder, hundreds of voices overlapping. "Trade. Trade. Trade. Give him back. Give him back. Shut up." Ethan roared, his throat raw. The boy lunged, tackling him to the floor. The shard flew from Ethan's hand, skittering across the wood. Black eyes locked on his, the boy's breath cold against his face. "Don't you see, Ethan? You don't belong. You never did. You are the shadow. I am the real one." The words sank into him like knives, cutting through flesh and bone until they hit the marrow of his soul. And the worst part? Some part of him believed it. But beneath the weight of the boy's grip, Ethan felt something else, familiar. A chain around the boy's neck, brushing against his skin. A locket. The same locket Ethan's mother used to wear. His mother. The realization slammed into him like a thunderclap. The boy had it. The boy had her locket. But how? Ethan's chest heaved. He spat the words out between gasps, "That's mine." The boy's grin faltered, just for a moment. "No. It was always mine." The house groaned again, louder now, as if the walls themselves were listening, waiting to see who would claim the truth. The boy's grin lingered inches from Ethan's face, his breath rancid, like mold seeping through wet cloth. But Ethan's eyes weren't on the boy anymore. They were locked on the chain glinting in the dim light, the locket swaying back and forth as if it had its own pulse. It was unmistakable. He'd seen it countless times as a child, a delicate oval etched with tiny roses. His mother never took it off, not even when she cooked, not even when she slept. When he was small, he used to rest his head on her chest and press his ear against the cool metal, comforted by its steady thump against her heart. But now, here it was, dangling from the neck of the thing pinning him down. "That's hers," Ethan whispered, his voice hollow. The boy's black eyes narrowed. "No. It's mine." His fingers tightened on Ethan's shoulders, sharp nails piercing cloth and skin. "She gave it to me. Not to you. Never to you." Something cracked inside Ethan, not bone, but memory. A faint, forgotten image bloomed in his mind. A crib. Pale blue walls. A soft humming, the same lullaby he had heard before. A woman, familiar but not quite his mother, leaning over, fastening the locket around his tiny neck. But her face was wrong, blurred, unplaceable, and when he tried to focus, it dissolved like smoke. "No," Ethan croaked, shaking his head violently. "That's impossible. She raised me. She..." The boy leaned close, lips curling back to reveal small, too sharp teeth. "She raised the wrong one." The words hit harder than the boy's claws. They burrowed deep, seeding doubt that Ethan could no longer smother. His mind spun, replaying every family photograph, every memory of birthdays, Christmas mornings, scraped knees comforted with his mother's embrace. Were they real? Or were they stitched into him like a story someone wanted him to believe? He shoved hard, managing to wriggle free from under the boy's grip. He staggered toward the locket, fingers outstretched, but the boy yanked it back, clutching it tight against his chest. "You can't have it," the boy snarled, voice layered with something ancient. "It proves the truth. And the truth isn't yours." The nursery door at the end of the hall slammed wide, banging against the wall. The air grew thick with lavender, suffocating sweet, coating his tongue like syrup. The whispers grew clearer, almost sing-song. One was kept, one was stolen. One was loved, one was broken. Ethan's chest heaved as he turned toward the nursery. The room glowed faintly, light spilling from within, beckoning him. Something inside told him, if he stepped through that door, the last fragments of the truth would finally reveal themselves. The boy hissed, sensing his hesitation. "Don't go in there. It isn't yours to see." But Ethan moved, drawn forward like a moth dragged into flame. Every step closer made the lavender burn his eyes, made his throat tighten, but still he pressed on. The boy scrambled after him, jerking unnaturally fast across the floor. "Stop. It's mine. That's my room." Ethan reached the nursery doorframe. For the first time since he'd returned to this house, he hesitated, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of possibility. He knew what awaited him inside could tear apart everything he thought he was. But he also knew he couldn't turn away. Not anymore. He stepped inside. The nursery was pristine. Too pristine. The walls were freshly painted, the toys arranged neatly, no dust, no decay, like time had been halted the day it was sealed. In the center of the room sat a crib, rocking gently though no hand touched it. Inside, a small bundle wrapped in a faded blanket shifted slightly, as though something living still stirred within. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. He approached, trembling, and looked down. Inside the crib was a baby. Pale. Silent. Its face half hidden by the blanket. For a moment, he thought it was a doll, some cruel replica meant to unnerve him. But then the baby opened its eyes, his eyes. Wide, frightened, and unmistakably the same shade of green that stared back at him every time he looked in a mirror. Ethan stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. "No. No, that's not." The boy appeared behind him, voice low, venomous. "Do you see now? That was me. That was always me. You were the one stolen, dragged into their world while I rotted in the dark. You don't belong to them. You belong to me." The baby's lips moved, whispering faintly, impossibly. Ethan leaned in, straining to hear. The word that left the infant's mouth froze his blood. Brother. Ethan's knees nearly buckled. He turned, desperate, to the boy, but the boy wasn't a boy anymore. His body twisted, elongating, limbs bending at unnatural angles, face warping into something both infantile and monstrous. His grin stretched impossibly wide, splitting his cheeks as his voice deepened into a guttural snarl. Trade places, Ethan. It's time to go back where you belong. The nursery lights flickered violently. The baby wailed, the sound piercing, metallic, like knives scraping glass. The air thickened with lavender until Ethan could barely breathe. And then, the crib began to rock harder. The baby inside arched unnaturally, mouth opening wider than humanly possible. From its throat came not a cry, but the same warped lullaby that had haunted the house. Ethan clutched his head, the sound rattling his skull. He staggered toward the doorway, desperate to escape, but the boy, the thing, blocked his path. Its eyes glowed black, locket glinting against its chest. Choose, it commanded. Stay here forever, or take your rightful place below. Either way, you're not leaving this house alive. The walls shook violently, cracks racing across the ceiling. The house groaned like a living thing, eager for his decision. Ethan's hand shot out, grasping for the locket, the only tether to a mother who might not even be his. If he could just tear it free, maybe he could prove something, maybe to himself, maybe to whatever this thing was. His fingers brushed the chain. The boy's grin faltered. And then the floor collapsed. Ethan's scream was swallowed by the void as the nursery floor gave way beneath him. He fell through splintered wood and plaster, arms flailing in the dark. For an endless moment, he felt weightless, tumbling through the lavender haze. Then his back slammed against damp earth with a force that rattled his teeth. His breath tore from his lungs, and pain shot through his ribs. Above him, the square of light, the nursery, shrunk rapidly as the jagged hole in the floor sealed itself shut, beams groaning into place like a wound stitching over. Within seconds, it was gone. No ceiling. No hole. Just suffocating blackness. He lay stunned, the cold mud seeping through his clothes, heart hammering in his chest. He couldn't see, but he felt, the air down here was different. Wet, heavy, and sharp with the metallic tang of rust or old blood. His trembling fingers brushed over something solid nearby. Stone. He realized he was lying in some kind of chamber. A faint glow flared ahead, orange and flickering. Firelight. Ethan forced himself upright, clutching his side, and staggered toward it. The walls around him emerged from the dark, rough stone, slick with moss, etched with deep grooves. Not natural caves, but hand-carved tunnels that stretched in both directions like veins burrowing deep into the earth. The glow grew brighter, leading him into a vast underground hall. His breath caught at the sight. It was a dining room. A dining room beneath the house. A long wooden table sat in the center, grotesquely adorned. Rusted silver platters lay scattered across its surface, filled with decayed scraps of food that looked centuries old. Candle stubs flickered weakly, their flames refusing to die despite the dripping damp that coated everything. Around the table, in high-backed chairs, sat figures. Ethan froze. There were 6 of them. Men, women, all dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their skin gray and papery, eyes sunk deep into skull-like faces. Their heads lolled unnaturally, as if too heavy for their necks. Yet when Ethan stepped into the room, every single one lifted their gaze toward him in perfect unison. Their eyes, his eyes. The same piercing green. Ethan, the name slithered from their lips as one, a chorus of croaking voices. His legs nearly gave out. Who are you? The figure at the head of the table, a woman with long black hair streaked white, straightened with a sickening creak of bone. She clasped her hands together and smiled, though her lips cracked as if they hadn't moved in decades. We are your family. Ethan staggered back, shaking his head violently. No. My family is upstairs. My mother, my father. The woman's smile widened, too wide. Not yours. Never yours. You were taken from us. Stolen, to live in the light, while we were buried here in the dark. The others at the table murmured, their voices weaving into a low chant. Stolen. 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 Ethan's throat closed. He wanted to deny it, scream that it wasn't true, but the locket's memory, the boy's words, the photographs of strangers who looked too much like him, they all pressed against his mind like knives. The woman rose, her movements stiff and jerky, and drifted toward him. You don't remember, but you were ours. Our blood. Our air. They locked us away, built their lives above us, and raised you as their own. But blood cannot be severed. Blood calls you home. She reached out, her skeletal fingers brushing his cheek. Ethan flinched at the icy touch, bile rising in his throat. Why, he rasped. Why would they take me? The woman's face twisted. Because we were cursed. Banished to the dark, punished for sins long before you were born. They feared us. They envied us. And so they stole what was ours, you, and left us to rot below. The chanting grew louder. Return. 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 Ethan staggered back, colliding with the table. The rotten platters clattered, sending clouds of dust into the air. He gripped the edge, knuckles white, trying to anchor himself. His mind raced. Were these creatures really his blood? Or were they liars, weaving illusions to ensnare him? But deep in his chest, something twisted, a horrible recognition, as if a dormant string of memory was being plucked awake. The woman leaned close, whispering into his ear. We are not asking you to choose, Ethan. We are telling you. It is time to come home. The tunnel behind him roared suddenly with footsteps. Heavy, frantic. He spun just as the boy appeared, his twisted form lurching into the hall. The locket swung wildly against his chest, catching the firelight. No, the boy shrieked, pointing a crooked finger at Ethan. He's mine. He was my brother. He was supposed to rot here, not me. You can't have him. The seated family turned their heads slowly toward the boy, their green eyes blazing in the dark. The woman hissed, her voice sharp as glass. You were the mistake. The one left behind. The boy's face contorted with rage. His body convulsed, stretching taller, limbs cracking as they grew longer. His mouth unhinged, jaw snapping open too wide, a guttural howl tearing through the chamber. The torches flickered violently. Ethan pressed back against the table, trapped between two horrors, the family claiming him as their own and the brother who wanted to drag him down with him. The boy's warped voice thundered. If I can't have him, no one will. With that, the chamber began to collapse. Stones rumbled overhead, dust and dirt raining down. The family shrieked, their voices weaving into a deafening wail. The boy lunged for Ethan, claws outstretched. Ethan's gaze locked on the locket, swinging wildly in the chaos. His instincts screamed, that's the key. That's the truth. He dove forward, hand outstretched, just as the boy crashed into him. The two tumbled across the floor, choking in the falling dust, wrestling in the flickering firelight. Ethan's fingers clawed desperately at the chain. The boy shrieked, biting and scratching, but Ethan pulled with everything he had. With a sharp snap, the chain broke. The locket was in Ethan's hand. The world went silent. Everything, falling stone, shrieking voices, collapsing walls, froze in place as if time itself had paused. The locket pulsed faintly, warm in his grip. His fingers trembled as he turned it over, slowly opening the clasp. Inside, behind the glass, was a faded photograph. A woman and a man. Smiling. Younger than he remembered, but unmistakably familiar. The woman's eyes, his eyes. The man's jawline, his jawline. They weren't the parents who raised him. They were strangers. And yet, he knew in his bones, they were his real parents. Ethan's heart stopped. His entire world fractured. And then, the stillness shattered. The boy let out a roar of rage, the chamber exploding back into chaos. The roar of the boy echoed like thunder through the collapsing chamber. Ethan stumbled back, clutching the locket so tightly it cut into his palm. The tunnel shuddered, dust and rock raining from above. The grotesque family at the table shrieked and wailed, their voices a chorus of grief and fury, green eyes glowing brighter as though they were feeding on the chaos. The boy, his supposed brother, lunged again, his twisted frame jerking in unnatural spasms, claws flashing in the firelight. His voice cracked with madness, both childlike and guttural. "You were never meant to leave. You were meant to rot with me. You're mine, Ethan. Mine." Ethan ducked, rolling across the slick stone floor. His ribs screamed in pain, but adrenaline dragged him forward. He sprang up, heart pounding, and thrust the locket out in front of him like a weapon. The boy froze mid-lunge. His clawed hand trembled in the air, inches from Ethan's throat. His eyes, those same cursed green eyes, locked on the photograph inside the locket. A strangled cry tore from his throat, half rage, half heartbreak. "No," he rasped. "No, they chose you. Always you. Never me." The family around the table hissed in unison, their voices weaving into something like a chant. "Blood remembers. Blood remembers. Blood remembers." Ethan's grip tightened on the locket. His voice cracked as he shouted over the chaos. "What are you? What the hell are you to me?" The woman at the head of the table, his mother, if her words were true, rose with a slow, rattling breath. She stretched her skeletal hand toward him, her cracked lips curling into a grin that split her face too wide. "You are ours," she whispered. "The firstborn, taken from us in the night. We were cast down here, condemned for sins we did not commit. They stole you to save you from our fate. But blood always finds its way back." Her eyes glowed like emerald fire. "And now you will take your rightful place." The chamber buckled, walls groaning, floor splitting beneath Ethan's feet. The boy let out a howl of fury and leapt for him again, slamming him against the stone wall. Ethan's head cracked hard, stars bursting in his vision. The boy's claws raked across his chest, tearing fabric, skin burning where they grazed him. "You don't belong to them," the boy screamed, spittle flying. "You belong to us. To the dark. To me." Ethan's hand, slick with blood, fumbled with the locket. He forced it open again, staring at the faces inside. His real parents. The ones who had been stolen from him, or had stolen him, the truth spun dizzyingly in his mind. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. But something happened when the locket opened. The air shifted. The ground stilled. The green glow in the family's eyes flickered. And for a brief, impossible moment, Ethan saw another image flicker over the photograph. The same couple, but different, older, broken, their smiles gone. And between them, a crib. Empty. Ethan's knees buckled. He realized the truth like a knife to the chest. He hadn't been stolen. He had been traded. The cursed family beneath the house had demanded something in exchange for their survival. A child. A life. And his parents, the ones who raised him, had given him up to save themselves, then taken another child in his place. The boy. They had left the boy here in the dark. Left him to rot. Left him to become this. Ethan's stomach lurched. His entire life, his very identity, had been built on betrayal. He was neither the son of the parents above nor fully the child of the cursed family below. He was the price of survival. Nothing more. The boy's voice broke, wild with anguish. They left me. They left me to die while you lived in the sun. They chose you. His claws dug deeper into Ethan's shoulders. So now you're going to stay here, forever, with me. Ethan's mind screamed, no. He thought of his life above, the laughter, the warmth, the fragile comfort of the only parents he had ever known. And he thought of the faces in the locket, strangers yet undeniably bound to him by blood. 2 families. 2 lives. And both had betrayed him. Something inside him hardened. He shoved the boy back with all his strength. The twisted child stumbled, shrieking. Ethan raised the locket high, its surface glowing now, as though it burned with the weight of truth. The cursed family hissed, covering their eyes, their forms trembling as if unraveling. I am not yours, Ethan shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. I am not his. I am mine. The locket flared, light flooding the hall. The boy screamed, his body cracking, dissolving into shadow as he clawed at the air. The family wailed, their voices stretching into an endless howl as their forms split and dissolved, bursting like ash into the darkness. The chamber shook violently, the ceiling caving in. Ethan ran, the floor collapsing behind him, the tunnels crumbling into void. His lungs burned, his legs threatened to give out, but he forced himself forward, clutching the locket like a lifeline. At last, he saw it, a thin sliver of light ahead, impossibly bright against the dark. He hurled himself toward it just as the ground vanished beneath him. He tumbled through the light, hitting hard against wooden boards. He gasped, blinking against the sudden stillness. He was lying in the nursery. The room was silent. Untouched. The crib stood in the corner, the lavender walls glowing faintly. The door, the hidden door, was closed, its surface smooth and seamless, as though it had never been opened. Ethan dragged himself to his feet, chest heaving. The locket dangled from his fingers, heavy as lead. Behind him, the house creaked. Slowly, he turned. Standing in the doorway were his parents, the ones who had raised him. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide. His mother's trembling hand covered her mouth. His father's jaw worked, but no words came. They had heard. They had seen. The silence between them was unbearable. Finally, Ethan raised the locket, his hand shaking. Is it true? His voice was raw. Did you trade me? His mother's eyes filled with tears. His father looked away, shoulders sagging. Neither spoke. That was answer enough. The floor groaned. The lights flickered. The walls shuddered as if the house itself was breathing, waiting. Ethan's grip on the locket tightened. He stepped past them without a word, down the hall, out of the house into the night air. Behind him, the door slammed shut. The house went still. Ethan didn't look back. But as he walked into the dark street, one thought gnawed at his mind, chilling him deeper than anything he had faced underground. If the house could hide a room, if his whole life had been a lie, then how many more forgotten doors were still waiting to be opened?